From the Times and the Sunday Times, this is The Story. I'm Manveen Rana. It's the most watched daytime talk show in America. On a slick, softly lit set, among a collection of sofas and bright cushions and a huge desk, the host, Whoopi Goldberg, is bursting with excitement.
Welcome back. The next president of the United States.
The audience erupts. It's the warmest welcome. A spot on The View is like gold dust for a political campaign, a chance to shine and win over more than 3 million viewers, as long as it goes well.
Would you have done something differently than President Biden during the past 4 years?
There is not a thing that comes to mind in terms of, and I've been a part of most of the decisions that have had impact.
Was this the moment that Kamala Harris will most regret? Was this the moment that doomed her campaign? People were angry with the state of the country, and they blamed the government for many things, including inflation.
Somebody came up to me and said, "Oh my God, Trump's going to win." I go, "Why is that?" He goes, I went to the grocery store. Butter's over $3.
The $7.
What's that?
The $7.
What's that? Butter is $7?
Yeah.
What?
Some
Is
places.
it framed in gold? Okay.
For weeks, we were told the polls were neck and neck. But when the votes were counted, the Democrats lost every single swing state, and for the first time in 36 years, they lost the popular vote. How did it all go so wrong for the Harris campaign? We hear from two Democrats on why their party lost and how it needs to change. The story today, the Democrat blame game.
My name's Christopher Hale. I am a Democratic consultant and strategist. I am originally from Tennessee, where I ran for United States Congress in 2020. I'm a red state Democrat. I'm from the heart of MAGA country, the part of this country that has swung radically to the right in the past decade. But I'm currently here in Washington, D.C. I do consulting for red state Democrats, but also I do faith-based outreach on behalf of the party. And I was deployed in Pennsylvania, and I also served as the chairman of Catholics for Harris.
Christopher, you've been out campaigning in Pennsylvania. You were door knocking, talking to people on the street. What were you hearing? Why weren't they voting Democrat? Because Pennsylvania in the past has been a Democrat state.
Absolutely. And I should say that I was in part of the state that we have seen the sliding away from the Democratic Party, Western Pennsylvania, most notably the Pittsburgh community and suburbs surrounding. I think what's so clear to me is what was a white working class phenomenon of 2016 has now turned into a multiracial working class phenomenon against the Democratic Party and for Donald Trump, specifically Donald Trump, not just the GOP, for Donald Trump. And I think that what is really interesting is when I was knocking on the doors in Black communities in Pittsburgh, and this is a stunning statistic, it's anecdotal, but about 1 in 4 households had questions to me about Kamala Harris's support for transgender surgeries for inmates, which of course is referencing a 8-figure ad buy that the Trump campaign ran again and again, really from right after Labor Day forward, saying that really effectively that Kamala Harris supports they, them, and Donald Trump is for you.
Kamala supports taxpayer-funded sex changes for prisoners.
Surgery.
For prisoners.
For prisoners. Every transgender
inmate in the prison system would have access.
It's hard to believe, but it's true. Even the liberal media was shocked Kamala supports taxpayer-funded sex changes for prisoners and illegal aliens.
Every transgender inmate would have access.
Kamala's for they, them. President Trump is for you.
I'm Donald J. Trump, and I approve this message.
I think this message was succinct, it was clear, it was compelling, and most notably, we did not have a response. I did not have a response on the door, but the party did not have a response writ large. And I think what's remarkable about this is in March and April, Donald Trump went to the middle, if you will, at least rhetorically, on abortion. He said no to a national abortion ban, and he angered a lot of those pro-life groups. Notably, though, they did not denounce him. They did not say, we're done with Donald Trump. If there was any movement to the middle in my party on social issues, there would be denunciations from the activist group and there would be recriminations. Strangely enough, I'm really a part of what's considered the secular party here in the United States, but my party spends more time punishing heretics than seeking converts. And I think that's really cost us on the ground. A lot of what the right derisively calls woke policies really antagonize working class communities and particularly communities of color. The only demographic I can tell doing this work day in and day out that we have increased our foothold in, our winning percentage in, is wealthy whites making six figures or more in this country. And that's not the party, frankly, that I want to be a part of.
Why aren't they connecting with what used to be the Democrat Party's base? It used to be the working classes who would vote Democrat. You mentioned what are loosely termed as woke issues. They didn't like where they were on transgender policy. Abortion cancelled out slightly with Trump taking this middle-of-the-road approach where he could be all things to all people. He could still be pro-abortion to people who wanted him to be and anti at the same time. What else were you hearing? What else was concerning people about Democrat policy?
I think a lot of people that I spoke to who did vote Democrat as recently as 8 years ago is that the Democratic Party does not like them. They do not like them, which is a remarkable thing to say. It's not a policy prescription. It's not a critique left or right. It's actually saying they believe the elected leaders of our party disdain their communities. This is particularly pronounced among men, I would say.
And tell me about that. What were you hearing? In what way did they feel that the party had disdain for them?
This is a great question. I imagine they're consuming media that, frankly, I'm not consuming, that very few people in my party are consuming, but that it basically suggests to them, without any true pushback, because we have not allowed ourselves to be present in those ecosystems, those information streams, that the party thinks that they are wholesale degenerates. What Joe Biden unfortunately said and what Hillary Clinton said much more forcibly.
So this is Hillary Clinton calling them deplorable.
You could put half of Trump supporters into what I call the basket of deplorables. Right? The racist, sexist, homophobic, xenophobic, Islamophobic, you name it.
Joe Biden calling Trump supporters garbage.
Just the other day, a speaker at his rally called Puerto Rico a floating island of garbage. Well, let me tell you something. They're good, decent, honorable people. The only garbage I see floating out there is his supporters.
With Biden, I do think it was a gaffe, but what oftentimes is the biggest problem in politics is when you say something that you don't mean to say, but that you actually believe. What is concerning to me is there is a significant number in my party's establishment who disdain Trump voters. And that is a remarkable way to lose an election. If a salesman does not sell a product, who do they send back to school? Do they send back to school the customer or the salesman? And you can't denigrate the voters and say it's their fault. Mm-hmm. And right now, I think that we are in a very perilous situation in our party because it seems to me that we do not like a significant portion of the country we live in. And that is not a pathway to electoral success.
Yeah, I mean, you can't win people over if you don't like them. You mentioned the media ecosystems that exist in America and how a lot of Democrats wouldn't even be aware of how they're being described and sold because they don't exist in those ecosystems. Given that the Democrats had more money and more data than the Republicans this time round. How did they not manage to overcome that? How were they not aware of what their traditional base was thinking?
What we have seen in my party is, I would call it a data-driven politics of exclusion. Data is an incredible piece of information that can tell us about where you live, your voting patterns, your educational level, etc. But obviously, politics is a science and an art. And the art of politics is lost in data. And what the Trump campaign did so well is they let 1,000 flowers bloom. It was remarkable. No one thinks that Donald Trump is a religious man. But when he, multiple times throughout this campaign, tweeted very niche Catholic things, it played to communities that were traditionally Democrat, Latino communities in particular. Remarkably, in the United States, the biggest rise of religion is among young men, which has never happened in this country. So I think that he allowed a thousand flower blooms approach that was effective. We were very corporatized. It was remarkable to me the decision to skip the Al Smith dinner. The Al Smith dinner is a Catholic dinner, a charitable dinner in New York City. All it is it's giving permission structures to Catholics to say that we hear you, we see you, we care about you, and we're courting you. We want your vote. Of course, Joe Biden was only the second Catholic president of the United States, but we chose to skip that dinner. And it led to a week more of headlines suggesting that Kamala Harris was anti-Catholic.
Kamala Harris breaking from tradition and skipping the historic Al Smith charity dinner in New York to campaign in swing states instead. The gala, benefiting Catholic charities, is an event that both presidential candidates typically attend. President Trump saying he will be there, using the moment to take aim at the vice president on Truth Social, saying her decision is, quote, sad but not surprising.
But here's the bigger headline. It was another example for those who wanted to take it of Democrats do not like you. They do not like your community. That's what I heard on the ground. Quite frankly, that's what I've experienced in the flesh in my own run for Congress. I heavily courted Trump voters, somewhat successfully. I outperformed President Biden in my district, one of the only Democrats to do that in 2020. But the biggest thing that I found was these communities do not feel that the party cares about them, their lives, their lot.
It does feel like young men were completely underestimated by the Democrats. They seem to have moved in huge numbers to Donald Trump. What exactly is happening there? Obviously, religion is part of it, but I mean, was this partly because you had a female candidate? Was this partly because abortion was such a big issue? What do you think was playing on that vote?
In the United States in 2017, the first year of Donald Trump's presidency, there was what is known as the Me Too movement, which is, of course, an attempt to eradicate men who were sexual abusers, rapists, harassers from positions of power in the United States. I consumed that. I'm a 35-year-old man. I consumed that at the age of 28. So that happened when I was 28. If you were 25, that happened when you were 18. And a lot of these young men heard a message that was not the intended message of Me Too, but perhaps during the resistance era of this country, of the left, got through, was basically a message that all men are bad. Men are wholesale, irredeemable, they're toxic, and they are irredeemably sinful. And I think that message is really hard to consume when you're coming to age and you're struggling economically. You're struggling socially. We know that women are doing much better in education and even professional growth in their 20s. So a lot of young men are looking around and they're seeing women do better than them, but they are told that they themselves are irredeemable. I think there is a significant portion of our party who might actually think that. Once again, it's a very come to Jesus moment for myself. I saw after the Hamas attack on Israel last year, parts of the anti-Israel left that was anti-Semitic that I did not know existed in this party. And I think this election reveals that there is a part of the left in this party that actually just wholesale disdains men. The word bro is the liberal version of childless cat ladies. It is our put down of folks that we do not like.
You mentioned Israel and Hamas. Do you think the Democrats have lost the Arab American vote for good? That seems to have been a feature, certainly in Michigan.
I'll say this. I think that the Democratic Party's unwillingness to go to communities specifically and ask for their vote is a pathway to losing the Muslim population for good, the Arab population for good. And this is what Donald Trump does. This is what is so fascinating and, dare I say, admirable about Donald Trump. He will, in the same day, go to the Pennsylvania Jewish community outside of Philadelphia and Pittsburgh and say, Jews, I am asking for your vote.
Any Jewish person that votes for her or a Democrat has to go out and have their head examined. Because if you see what's happening with Israel and Jewish people right now, there has never been a more dangerous time since the Holocaust if you happen to be Jewish in America.
He will go to Michigan and say, Muslims, Arabs, I am asking for your vote. He will name them by name.
We've gotten to know and really understand Muslims for Trump. How about that? Muslims for Trump. And it's become a big movement in Michigan, a beautiful movement. And you know what they want? They want peace. They really do. They don't want to be in wars. They're very smart.
It's really remarkable. In this campaign, there was deep aversion to asking for people's votes by name with two exceptions, African Americans and women. They wouldn't say Catholics, we want your vote. They wouldn't say Muslims, we want your vote. Jews, we want your vote. That's considered politically incorrect in the modern day Democratic Party, but Donald Trump did it and it paid off.
I've also got to ask about the personalities. Was Kamala Harris the right candidate for president, and was Tim Walz the right VP pick?
I will say this. The answer is I don't know. We didn't go through a vetting process, obviously. It was President Biden who made the choice, and the Democratic Party fell in line quickly. I think they were victims of a Democratic Party infrastructure that has lost its way for a long time. Joe Biden was able to be an aberration because he truly was a moderate. But in 2019 and 2020, Kamala Harris, unfortunately, along with most of her compatriots in that primary, took indefensibly left-wing positions because they thought that's what it took to win this primary. They dogged us for the entirety of the campaign.
And which left-wing issues in particular do you think dogged them?
The fact that I'm uncomfortable saying this tells you that it's probably an issue. I think it's an absurdity that we suggest in this party that if you don't want your daughter to compete against biological males in sports, that you're a bigot. Or that if you don't want biological men, boys, being in the same restroom as your daughter, you are a bigot. I think that what we have done on these issues is basically on social issues, we've said, you are either with us or you are a bigot. And that is a significant shift in this country. When we went really hard in the paint on transgender issues, that is a very hard thing to consume for a lot of Americans, over 40, over 50. It is a completely different framework of the world than that they grew up with. And I think that instead of showing some mercy, some sense of understanding, I think we pushed hard that everyone who's not with us on this agenda is a bigot.
I'm Nick Hanauer. I am a serial technology entrepreneur and venture capitalist, but I'm also the founder of a civic enterprise called Civic Ventures, which is headquartered in Seattle, Washington, that operates at the intersection of policy and politics with a focus mostly on political economy and political economy issues.
And Nick, you are a Democrat supporter, and you've often written in support of Bidenomics, as it's been called. We're told that one of the main reasons people didn't vote for the Democrats in this election was the economy. The voters clearly didn't like Bidenomics.
Yes.
Why is that?
So I think there are two pieces of context that are really important to understand. And the first is what I consider to be the most important socioeconomic fact in the United States, which is that since 1975, there's been approximately an 80 trillion, and that's trillion with a T, $1 trillion transfer of wealth from the bottom 90% of Americans to the top 1% of Americans. It amounts to a few $1 trillion a year that was in the wages of working Americans and is now in the pockets of people like me at the very top. That's the first thing. And again, for context, what that means is that today the median full-time worker in America earns in the range of $55,000 a year. But if they had been held harmless from the last 50-odd years of neoliberal policymaking, in other words, if they had maintained their same share of the economy since 1975, instead of earning $55,000 a year, they would earn approximately $100,000 or $110,000 a year. That's the first thing you have to understand about what has happened to the economy in the United States. And the second thing you have to understand is that for 95% of Americans, and mostly not the kind of people who listen to your podcast, the economy exists not as an abstraction. Like, people don't understand what GDP is. They don't even understand what the economy is. The economy exists as my job and the expenses, and that's it. And so when you combine the objective fact that for most Americans, they have been savaged over the last 50 years by economic policy making on both the right and the left, and that when they went through this incredible bump in higher prices as a consequence of the global supply chain shock that accompanied the pandemic, anger collided with anger, and you just ended up having people be really, really super mad about what their circumstances were and in a mood to blame anyone at hand. And as consequential as the Biden administration has been on economic policy, and I'd love to talk about that, virtually none of the incredibly important things that they accomplished had an immediate impact on the typical American. So as consequential, for example, as the Inflation Reduction Act will be in terms of generating new jobs, addressing the climate crisis, so on and so forth, 95% of Americans don't know that it passed, have no idea what's in it, and have not yet felt any of the resulting impacts from it. Same for the infrastructure plan or the CHIPS Act or a variety of other things that they did, which were incredibly important, but are unknown to the majority of citizens and, again, not felt.
So obviously, with a lot of economic policies, they take some time to filter down, to be felt, for the impact to be felt on ordinary people. But as you say, so for your ordinary American worker who has felt left behind, really, whose wages are less than they should be, they've ended up in that position because of both right and left economics. Do you think the Biden administration did enough to recognize that and to alleviate their pain? What's happening that means the Democratic base in the past, ordinary workers in the Rust Belt, people who would have voted Democrat, are now turning against the Democrats?
So I think what you have to recognize is that really no Democratic administration until the Biden administration was prepared to address any of these issues in any way, shape, or form. I mean, Barack Obama was president for 8 years and did literally nothing to address these concerns. I don't fully agree that there was nothing that we could have done. There were things we could have done but couldn't get done. Certainly there were things that Obama could have done but didn't do, like substantially raising the minimum wage. The minimum wage in the United States today is $7.25 an hour. It's $2.13 an hour plus tips for tipped workers, which include all hospitality workers. If the minimum wage had merely tracked productivity gains over the last decades, it would be in the range of $23, $24 an hour. So there are things that we could have chosen to do that would have made a dramatic, immediate impact on people's lives. But Obama chose not to do those things because he was as neoliberal as Ronald Reagan. And Barack Obama couldn't do because of the neoliberal wing of the Democratic Party. So what we were left with were things possible within reconciliation and things that were unbelievably strategically important to the country, and I believe will be proved to be incredibly important, but we're absolutely disconnected from the lives of most people. And what they're left with is just milk costs a lot more, right? Again, it's super unfortunate, but it is just the painful reality.
And for people in that position, people who work in factories, who feel like their job is under threat, factories being shut down, the appeal of Trump talking about tariffs suddenly becomes an answer.
Yeah, and you had two things happening at once. You had Trump talking about tariffs, which is just another form of his wall, right? The last time he ran, he talked about the wall. This time he talked about tariffs. And on the other hand, as consequential and effective as Joe Biden was as president, he was a terrible messenger. Probably his age had a lot to do with that, right? He just was not effective in telling a story about what his administration was doing, why they were doing it, and how it would benefit people. And again, the combination of those two things was incredibly unfortunate. And I mean, I think you know, and it's been reported widely, that every government in power in the Western world over the last years has done poorly in the polls. You saw that unfold in the UK relatively recently as well.
It's a bad time to be an incumbent because of global inflation.
It is a bad time to be an incumbent. And it's a bad time to be an incumbent because, leaders from both parties, both Republican and Democrat in the United States, abandoned the interests of the majority of citizens. It's just objectively true. They just forgot about the interests of the median worker. It's 50 years of neoliberal policymaking, or you can call it trickle-down economics, this idea that the richer the rich get, the better off everyone else will be. That, tax cuts for the rich, deregulation for the powerful, and wage suppression for everyone else will somehow yield a thriving economy and a thriving middle class. And that just didn't happen. It's just not true. But it is very hard to fix. Get yourself out of a hole that you've been digging for 50 years. And certainly 3.5 years of the Biden agenda wasn't enough.
So, Nick, finally, just looking ahead, what do the Democrats need to do now in order to get re-elected in 4 years' time? How do they need to change their stance and their communication on the economy? You talked about minimum wages, for example, but policies like that in America, which seems odd to anybody in Europe, sometimes get accused of being communism almost. There's a lot of fear of socialism.
Again, that's because we are the most neoliberal, trickle-downy economy in the, of the advanced economies. And we have persuaded ourselves that anything we do for ordinary people is socialism, and anything we do for the rich is capitalism and good. And it will just take a long time to deprogram people from that. Two things have to happen for Democrats is that they have to redouble their efforts to connect with and build a policy agenda that directly and materially improves the welfare of the median worker, median family. And the other thing I predict will happen is that the Trump administration and the Republicans will take the economy back to this ridiculous trickle-down thing. And 75 million Americans are going to learn over the next 4 years that putting their trust in Donald Trump to improve their circumstances was probably a terrible mistake. It's going to be great for people like me at the top of the pyramid. My taxes are going to go down, but everybody else's are going to go up. I mean, the signature accomplishment of the Trump administration and the last administration was a $1.7 trillion tax cut for the rich. So it's hard to believe they won't double down on that strategy. And if the Republicans hold all three chambers, which seems likely at the moment, it's going to be very, very good to be rich, and it's going to be very expensive to not be rich in America.
With that backdrop, what do the Democrats need to do to win again? Back to Washington, D.C., and the Democrat strategist, Christopher Hale.
I'm looking outside at the headquarters of the Democratic National Committee, and I've tried really hard to move away from DC, but all the power, all the influence, all the money, all the relationships are tethered to this city. I think that there has to be both spiritually and physically a move out of DC for this party. We have gotten caught up in the intricacies of DC politics, and we have very little influence west of I-95, which runs through New York and DC, and east of I-5, which goes from San Francisco to LA. We have to put a party back in the center of the country and physically place our people there. We need to re-engage with Middle America, but more importantly, we need to like our fellow citizens.
With thanks to Christopher Hale and Nick Hanauer. You can follow all the latest developments as America prepares for a historic second Trump presidency at thetimes.com. The producers today were Chris Wade, Priyanka Deladia, and Taryn Siegel. The executive producer was Kate Ford, and sound design and theme composition were by Mal Assetto. If you can, please do leave us a review wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening. See you tomorrow.